Why do certain moments trigger you so strongly? Why do the same patterns keep repeating? And how can you begin to break free? Welcome to What Triggers You with Stacy Pellettieri. Each week, one listener question unpacked with compassion, clarity, and practical tools for change.
Today we have Savio P. Clemente, a keynote and TEDx speaker, journalist, board-certified wellness coach, NBC, HWC, ACC. Those are your credentials. You'll have to tell us when we're all done what that stands for. Savio is a best-selling author and healthcare leadership strategist. He works with leadership teams after disruption, when the crisis is over, but the performance has not fully recovered. Because performance usually doesn't fail first, clarity does. And I look forward to unpacking that a little bit more. After 2,000 plus interviews with global leaders and his own experience rebuilding after surviving cancer twice, Savio developed the Adaptive Resilience Leadership Framework. His work helps leaders cut through cognitive overload, make clearer decisions, and avoid the quiet performance drop that often follows high-pressure moments. He focuses on the intersection of healthcare, leadership, and human performance, helping organizations operate with clarity and consistency when it matters most. So welcome. I'm definitely excited to have this conversation.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you so much. That was a mouthful. I apologize in advance.
Oh, don't apologize for being awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let's see what we can unpack today. I'm really excited.
Yeah, for us to start, I'd love for you to kind of just explain to me in your own words, really, what does all of this mean? What is it that you do?
Yeah. So I speak with healthcare leaders, especially on this idea of what happens after disruption. A lot of people and crisis, a lot of people want to, let's figure out the crisis. Yeah, that's important. But what happens after the crisis? Because that's when you have to really figure out how to reorientate, reintegrate. That's where you win or lose. And so this idea, and my main central thesis is performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. Because if you don't have clarity within yourself or find some semblance of normalcy or some idea of self-regulation, you cannot lead effectively. And so what I deal with healthcare leaders is extremely high stakes. They're dealing with themselves, their team, their organization, and another human being. And so that, especially after COVID, is not something that we take lightly, because you've seen it in your work with burnout and with individuals actually flailing and trying to figure out, is this even the path for me anymore? And we need to get healthcare a lot more strengthened nowadays. And so I speak on it on keynote stages. I'm a journalist right now. I'm running a interview series with CEOs and CMOs on the healthcare leadership operating system. And I'm also an executive coach as well.
Yeah, I think it's such really amazing, important work that you do, because the reality is in the healthcare field, right, as leaders, we are definitely under an enormous amount of stress and pressure. And we carry with us not only our own issues and our own past and our own needs, but we carry right in front of us the needs and the traumas and the stress of the people we're trying to help. So can you just repeat for me again what that line was that you said?
Sure. Performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. Because often people feel like the pressure has gone quiet, but not necessarily. It's just gone internal. And so how do you figure out how to unearth that internal stuff that's happening? And a lot of times we push it down. We actually create facades, masked roles for ourselves. And we try to have a distance with how we actually feel and think. And we rely solely on the cognitive overwhelm and the cognitive load that's happening. I see it consistently and constantly. It's like, I am the body of knowledge now, and I need to then tell you what you need to do because I'm an expert. And don't get me wrong, absolutely, you've trained, you've studied, you've done a whole bunch of things, but are you okay? And you and I spoke briefly before we even decided on this about the show, The Pit. I mean, Stacy, I love that show, but I'll be honest with you, I have to reset my nervous system after that show. I'm completely lost with that show. Like, I love it, but I'm like, it shows such in a very non-facade way that these healthcare leaders are not okay. They're just not. They're not in any way, shape, or form regulated.
Yeah, I love that you bring this up. This is so important, and I love that you're like, "Are you okay?" Because sometimes we're not, sometimes we're not okay. I'd love to really kind of like lead this conversation with an example. And if you don't have one, I can bring one up, but I would imagine from your work, you probably do. Do you have an example of a healthcare leader that you've worked with where you saw them really, their triggers really in action, where there's some sort of a trauma response to something that's happening in front of them, which really brings them to this place where clarity is failing, right? They're not okay because of something that has been, triggered and conjured up for them that they may not even be aware of. And they're so not okay in the moment that they really can't even effectively do their job to show up and help others. Do
Yeah.
you have something you can kind of use for us as a story that we can use?
Yeah. A doctor that I know, very well lauded doctor, he completely stumbles on his words. I'm a very calm person, as you can tell. I'm the
Yeah.
same way as I am in any situation. And he would just stumble. And then he revealed to me that his son, he's in 8th grade, found a tumor. They found a tumor. And they think that the tumor was there since birth. And it rattled his wife. And
Yeah.
it just didn't effectively allow him to be completely present. He was always like, he would say things and then repeat himself and then forget that he said it. And then also he told me because his wife wasn't very supportive, or at least needed her nurturing with that, and he couldn't provide that, it brought back his own trauma. So he unfortunately was diagnosed with cancer at 17 years of age, which then propelled him to seek and go into medicine. And I said to him, I'm like, would you like me to speak to your son? I said, I know, I'm like, there's a large age gap here. And I said, is your son someone who's open to speaking? Is he like feeling introspective? He's like, no, my son is completely the opposite. I'm like, okay, I just wanted to offer. And then it turns out that he actually left the healthcare system and he told me, I'm not going to leave medicine. But that was a real world example that just popped into my head because
Yeah.
the consequences of that and what that ultimately led for him to decide to do. I'm sure he had pressure with his family structure as well, being a doctor, taking care of other people, and then not being, but what could he have done? I mean, how could he have known that his son was experiencing that? And one of the things he actually said that he was happy that he was home for was that he was noticing that his son for a couple of days would throw up right in the morning when he woke up. And he said he remembered something in medical school that said that that is a precipitous of something deeper. So because of that, he, urged his son, to get checked and all that. And they found it, luckily. That's an example that just pops up into my head because it was personal. It affected his day-to-day. That day-to-day then affected his decision quality, which I speak a lot about. And then that affected his family structure. And that ultimately affected his employment with something he's worked almost 20 years for.
Yeah, it led to complete shutdown. So what I'm hearing here, and of course I can't know for sure without speaking to him, but as a trauma therapist, these are this is sort of like the low-hanging fruit. These are the things that seem most obvious to me, which may or may not be true. But what I'm hearing is, I mean, it's really multifaceted here. You've got so many layers. There's the possibility that, and you would know because you spoke to him, you can tell me if this sounds accurate, but there's the possibility that because he was sick at 17, right? He was probably so hypervigilant and so afraid and, went through something. And so for him, part of the positive that came from that for him, the resilience was, I'm going to go into medicine and I'm going to help other people that go through something like this, and I'm going to save lives. And not only that, but there could have even been a little bit more to it, a little bit deeper, right? If I know all the things, I can keep myself safe and I can keep my family safe, and I can make sure this doesn't happen not only to myself, but to the people I love. And there's that superhero complex that kind of compensates for the feelings of inadequacy or the fear of dying or the fear of something terrible happening without, that's not within your control. And so I would imagine that when his son was diagnosed, it triggered him on so many levels, not only as a parent now going through the absolute crisis of my child has cancer, which no parent ever wants to hear. It's a horrendous thing to have to go through. It's worse than finding out yourself has cancer, I think, for most parents. But, also triggering everything he went through at 17, and also triggering now, I thought I had a plan and the plan isn't working. And so it completely screws with his own identity, because his whole identity is wrapped up in, I'm going to be the savior. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen. So it's like, not only is it having to accept and face this horrible road ahead for his child and as a parent, but he now has to question who he is. And so I would imagine that he probably unfairly to himself, right, questioned whether or not he could have known, he should have known, he could have done, he should have done, he should have noticed, should have caught sooner, all the things that are not realistic, because it's all caught up in the identity he created for himself to keep himself safe in the first place because of his childhood trauma, being diagnosed at 17.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And I also feel as well that you also felt like life was repeating itself, that he literally has no control over that, and that it's bad luck or it's a sin on the family, whatever people try to rationalize when it comes to any type of trauma. And that's why I offered that, even though I was going through my own situation. I know you mentioned at the top of the hour talking about the fact that I'm a 2-time cancer survivor, but that was during the fact that I was still in treatment. I offered that because I kind of felt in a way that I could not diffuse it, but I could offer like a baton. Like, you don't have to carry the journey completely with this, that there's someone who's been through it not once, but twice now.
Yeah.
And if it's not aligned, it's not aligned. So I didn't push it. And plus, like, what adult is talking to like an eighth, like a child who's in 8th grade? Like, there's not, like, Michael Jackson's the exception. Okay. But like, we usually don't do it if a stranger is there, unless it's a family friend. So I was like, okay, I just wanted to offer it.
Yeah, it was kind of you to offer, but you bring up a really good point. If you're okay talking about it, and we can talk about it, through your experience, but we can also talk about it through this individual's experience. But you bring up, the repeat trauma. And the repeat trauma is a very, very difficult thing to navigate, because it's one thing to go through a trauma and have that experience sort of stuck in your neural networks and living in your body the way we know trauma, unfortunately, can do without, proper treatment and working through it. And so if this gentleman, went through this trauma at 17, and his resilience story is, I'm going to be in control by becoming a doctor. And although, right, that resilience is sort of pushing through and gritting through and coming up with a plan, and it's a wonderful, beautiful plan, it doesn't really speak to the nature of trauma healing, which requires us to actually sit with and process the pain without a plan, right? Without control, to be able to accept uncertainty and to be able to really process all of the emotions and feelings. And so when we don't really do that and we come up with this plan for control, and then a repeat happens, and now it's like, holy crap, this is happening again. So it can really be, so difficult when you go through a trauma and you kind of get through and you pass through and you stick with, people sometimes look at it as resilience. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to come up with all these plans. I'm going to be in control. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And the reality is, sometimes what looks like resilience isn't really resilience at all, right? We push ourselves to keep going and we don't pause to do the hard work and we don't pause to heal, right? And so it sounds like what may have happened to this individual that you were working with is that probably because he was so young and it was so scary, he came up with this plan to feel in control and he didn't give himself the opportunity to heal. And so when everything started all over again for him, almost like on repeat, there's so much there that gets triggered, like seeing it through the lens of what his parents might have experienced, right? Grieving, complicated grief arises when something happens before your development is complete. And you are a child when you experience something hard. And now you re-experience again as an adult, right? That can be very complicated because not only are you experiencing it in the moment, but you're re-experiencing it as the child through the lens of the adult saying, holy crap, this is what I went through. How horrible. This is what my parents went through. And now this is what my poor kid is going to have to go through. Right. So what we saw with this individual was a shutdown, right? Where he got to a point where he felt like he could not even tolerate the distress and he had to stop working.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did your work help him? Tell me about like how you sort of met that moment with him and guided him and helped him through that.
Well, this was a very personal, so it kind of bled from my work and then what I kind of do. So it wasn't really like a professional, so to speak, setting. But I think for me, really honed in because I know my lane. I'm a board certified health and wellness coach. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a trauma informed individual because traumas and those things have to be delicately handled properly. Otherwise, you're creating more of a mess. As a coach, we guide, we allow individuals to find the answers for themselves. But just generally, it was really more about trying to understand what the motives are. So I think for him, the high stakes was I spent all this time being a doctor. I spent all this time giving of myself, and he's a fantastic doctor, by the way. And now my son is going through this, but which is more important? Is my family structure and my life important? Because one of the things he mentioned was that his wife wasn't really okay. And I think there was a lot of pressure on her end for him to be more visible or more there. He was spending a lot of hours in the actual clinical side and also doing other things. I think he was also teaching as well. And so that made him come to a fork in the road as to what's actually here, like what's actually lighting me up at this moment in the stage of my life, as opposed to my professional accolades, right, which is there. What is really more important at the moment? And more important thing at the moment was that his son, as he expressed it, wants to live. He kept saying it, my son wants to live. And so my son's like, let's do it. And then him thinking to himself, well, I got through it, so he should get through it. But there's this unknown quality there because he doesn't control. None of us have a direct line to fate and destiny. If you believe in that stuff, no one knows. Yeah. And then the third element of it was him saying expressly to me that I don't want to leave medicine. So he made a choice that he doesn't want to leave medicine, but he then realized the direction that he's going is not serving himself and serving his family structure and what he feels is most important at the moment. So it was really just a unpacking of that and really trying to figure out how do you deal with that paradox, that contradiction, because it is, especially when you give of yourself so much. So it was just really, yes, it was a lot of trying to figure out what that pressure and that cognitive overload and that indecision and decision-making process looks like, but it was also a heart-to-heart because I felt for him. I'm like, even though I was going through my own situation, I know that when it comes to especially cancer, it is what it is. You do your best and with treatment and you seek out other forms of treatment and the rest of healing is just a question mark. But I knew that if I didn't offer that for myself, that even if I didn't make it, and I'm being really honest about this, even if I didn't make it, I would have passed on something to someone else who could make it.
Yeah. So there's two things I really want to point out in what you just said. Number one, You, even though you're not a therapist, what you did really was remarkable because you helped guide him at a time where he had lost clarity because so much was coming up for him and it was painful and scary and triggering all at the same time. You know, he was really in the past and the present and the future all at the same time. And that's never a good place to be, right? But it sounds like where he was. And I think through your guidance, you offered him the opportunity to kind of like stop and think, all right, I need to make choices here. And that requires me to be in acceptance of what's happening, acceptance of what has happened, and find a path towards where we want to go and how we can potentially get there, even if it means I have to make hard decisions. And sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in it and that somebody who's not emotionally involved in our story can sit with and bear witness to what we're dealing with and just give us the space to talk it out, right? So that we can find the clarity that we need. It sounds like that's exactly what he needed. And you were able to really just be that sounding board and that guiding light in that moment for him so that he could search within himself when he was in a moment where he was not okay and find a way to keep going and find a path. You know, the other part being, you know, that you were in it at the same time, going through it. And you mentioned at that point, not knowing what the outcome was going to look like for you. So I'm wondering for you, you know, what might that have been like? And is it triggering for you to be in a situation where you are now diagnosed with cancer for the second time and now trying to help and guide somebody who's going through this, you know, same kind of double whammy situation and they're feeling all these feelings. And I'm sure you've got your own stuff coming up. How do you, you know, kind of keep your triggers in check so that you can show up for others, right? Because you're talking about these individuals who aren't okay. So how are you okay in these situations and how are you able to guide?
Yeah. So one of the things I did feel, I actually felt in the moment when he shared that, I felt honored because he didn't have to share that with me. And he knew what I was going through and what that involves because he went through a similar situation. Granted, it wasn't a relapse, but it was the situation. I think when it comes to me, and maybe this is where context matters. So for your audience and for your viewers, for your listeners, I initially was diagnosed in 2014. I came back from a trip. Basically, it was stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I ended up being in the hospital for 15 days, ended up getting 6 rounds of something called R-CHOP chemotherapy. In 4.5 months of that, I got a remission status, and I was in remission for a decade. People often ask, oh, wow, then you kind of sorted out your life, right? Like you ate right. And I'm like, no, I ate right before I exercised. I did spinning, boxing. I did all those things. It's just lymphoma and blood cancers are what they are. Cancers are general are what they are. I don't even care if you believe that organ cancers, that there is people always have these theories. It's food, it's environment, it's whatever it is. I tell people all the time, Stacy, that I could live in the wound, but I would rather live in the walk. I want to know, what do I do given this? So I was good for a decade. And then I had a relapse in June of 2024. I went to my ENT of all places because I was experiencing nasal congestion and ear fullness. I thought he was going to give me nasal medication. He ended up telling me that he sees a lot of inflammation in the right nostril. He said to me, "You're a B-cell lymphoma survivor." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you know B-cells can live in the nasal cavity?" I'm like, "What?" I was like, "What?" I was like, "I can't believe we're talking about cancer here." And so he's like, "I've been burned as a doctor before." So he's like, "Let's be on the safe side. Let's do an MRI." They did one. It didn't look good. He said, "Let's do a biopsy." And 2 days later, Friday around 3 p.m., I received a March chart notification saying that it was a relapse. And the day after, Stacy, was supposed to be my 25th college reunion. People that I was emailing weeks before saying that I would see them. I'm excited. And I didn't have the courage, the guts, or the wherewithal to pretend things were okay because now I had a relapse. So if you're asking me how I dealt with all that, I never really felt between the first cancer and the second one, my fear was never death. It was that I never really lived, that I didn't fulfill what I came here to do. I know none of us have an assignment that's printed for us, but I felt like I was disappointing myself, disappointing others, that I just didn't live up to those things that I wanted to create. And when I mean create, I don't mean money. I mean joy that I gave, things that I realized, things that I learned, things that I offered, things that I shared, things that I myself grew from. I felt like that was might be cut short. And so I was worried about that. Scan anxiety is a real thing. Of course, I was scared of my scans. All these things were happening. But one thing that carried me through all that, and people don't know when it comes to a relapse of lymphoma, is that the only recourse you have is a very extensive, comprehensive healing protocol. It basically involves 2-3 day stays in the hospital. You have to get a neck catheter to harvest your own stem cells or get donor stem cells. It only took a day. And then typically you're in the hospital for 3 weeks when you get your stem cells back. I was there for 4 weeks because one of the days was so bad that I ended up having tachycardia throughout the process, and it would go to like 160, 170. They had to rush me to ICU to get norepinephrine. So I was in the hospital for 29 days. I lost 26 pounds. I left the hospital, did scans, did blood work, and I got a complete response to treatment, which they call a complete remission, but I don't use remission anymore. My doctor then offered and said to me, would you like to do a clinical trial for immunotherapy, which boosts the immune cells as an insurance backup? My sister's like, why the hell would you want to do that when you just went through months and months and months and months of treatment? And I said, because if I ever came back, I could never go back. I could never do that same healing modality. Mm-hmm. And so I did that for 4.5 months, and I did 5 months of physical therapy. And throughout that whole process, I just focused everything on healing. I looked at mainstream, I looked at integrative. I literally, if you ask me this question, there's nothing you could tell me that I did not explore. I even went to like ancient healing modalities. The only thing I didn't do is I didn't do psychedelics because I've interviewed people in that field, and I just didn't feel like my mind was in trauma, my physical body was. And so I needed the medicines. I needed that in order to feel like myself. My parents, after I got the remission status or the complete response to treatment, said, okay, go back to work. My parents are Asian Indian. They're like, go back to work. And they're like, good, you're good. And I'm like, no, I'm not good. I'm not good. I can always make money in the future.
That's their trigger, right?
Yeah, of course.
You have to keep going. You have to keep working. It's important to work, right? And that's coming from where they're coming from. But, you, luckily for yourself, you really listened to what you needed.
Absolutely. I said to them, I could always make money in the future. I can only get better now. I can't get better 6 months from now. I can only get better now. So I did what I needed to do, but I always had in the back of my mind, and I think the 29 days in the hospital set me on a good pace to understand, was that I had 2 anchors that no one could take away from me. I had stillness and silence. I was in a quarantine room. I made sure that when the doctors came and the nurses came, I mustered enough energy to meet them where they are, because I wasn't just being healed by the medicine and the doctors, that we were in a continuum, that we were healing each other in that sense. I was learning and trying to do the best I can to adapt to that resilience that I felt that I had. And so I created strategies. I reframed chemo as an elixir, as mana, as some life force. I didn't see it as poison. I submitted and I surrendered to that process of it.
Amazing. I'm so sorry you went through that, but I think it's a good story to share with everybody out there, because the reality is mindset is so important, right? That you kind of really shifted what you went through into, I have an opportunity here to be okay. I have an opportunity to live, and I want to live. And you fought for the opportunity to live, right? You weren't looking to just survive. You wanted to live. You were thinking about, how important life was to you, and that kept you going. And so you saw everything that they offered you, instead of as oh my God, I can't believe I have to go through this. You saw it as a gift. I get to go through this. I get to try this. I get to see if this helps me, right? It's a beautiful thing that you were able to do for yourself, especially being that you've been through it before, right? Because it's so easy, right, to fall into that doom and gloom of why does this happen to me? This is twice now. I should have known. I should have this. I should have that. Instead, you were just all right, let's go. Right.
And it's funny because a lot of people looked at me because they know my story the first time, right? And they know how I am as a personality type. And they're like, oh yeah, you beat it. And I said to them, no, I talked to a friend and he's like, why are you talking to me like you'll never speak to me again? I said, because I might not. And he's like, really? I said, this is a life-saving stem cell transplant. Like people, okay, forget about getting your own stem cells back or donor stem cells. Sometimes your body rejects it. You have infections. People actually like don't make it sometimes. It takes a year, almost 2 years sometimes to refacilitate everything that's been happening. And it's interesting because when I was there and I got my stem cell, they said to me, okay, they started counting the days. I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, Mr. Clemente, you have another birth date. I'm like, what? I'm like, are you talking woo-woo with me now? And they're like, no. They're like, this is considered a medical rebirth. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, once your bone marrow completely depletes, you're a whole different person internally. They're like, so we count the days. So he's like, now you have 2 birthdays. I'm like, oh, now I have a winter birthday and a summer birthday. Great, 2 presents for me. But I think what's also interesting is, and I don't want to discount the fact that my experience was not great. I mean, I didn't feel good. I lost 26 pounds. I was going to the bathroom consistently and constantly. Thankfully, I wasn't vomiting, but it's not easy. So I don't want people to be listening to this and thinking, oh, well, it's horrible. Cancer is terrible. But I do think, and what this experience and what life has shown me, was that I have 2 choices, not only about the things I can control and can't control. Of course, we all know that that's the case.
Yeah.
But it was more about the fact that through this process, maybe the answer is not about coming through it. Maybe the answer is who I become because of it. And that really landed to me deeply. And it's something I'm unpacking as I go forward.
Beautiful. And this is resilience. This is what resilience is about. So I'll tell you something personal. This is how my mother died.
Oh, wow. Wow, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Same story, different mindset. My mother, got the same diagnosis as you and did the stem cells and had to be in the hospital for 6 weeks and all the things, got the infections, rejected everything. But my mother, from the moment she was diagnosed until the moment she died, was angry. She was so triggered and so angry. And it was for her, she was the victim. This is happening to me. I can't do this. I can't live through this. I don't deserve this. Why is this happening to me? I don't want to have to go to the hospital. I don't want to. And I understand. So I don't judge it. I understand it is so hard to go through. And so when we talk about resilience, right, it's just pushing through and doing because you have to do. That's hard work. But resilience is being able to take this and say, all right, universe, you gave me this. What am I going to do with it? What can I do with it? How can I come out from the other side of this with something positive? Right. And so I read a book and I can't remember the name of it. I'll put it in the show notes. And it was written by a scientist actually, who talks about how the key of resilience is having a sense of awe. That if you can walk into any situation and you can just look at the world around you in that moment, regardless of whether it's good or bad, and find the awe in it, right? And that's what you did. You found awe. I get to find purpose in life. I get to have this opportunity. I get to fight for this. I get to figure out how I'm going to live after this. And I'm excited about it. You found the awe in a terrible, horrible situation, and you got through to the other side of it. And I think that's what resilience is about.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you sharing that. And I want to make it clear for people that not one time did I feel that anything was guaranteed. Yeah. Not one time. I didn't feel like I knew how this was going to end, like in a positive way or even in a negative way. And when I tell people that I surrendered, I didn't tell them I surrendered to death. I surrendered to the fact that I don't know. I surrendered to that contradiction, that paradox of not knowing.
Uncertainty. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's very important because we live in times where people want the answer now. They want the answer so quickly that AI can give it to them in seconds. And I tell people all the time, we don't live in a content problem. We live in a connection problem, and the connection problem with yourself. So when I deal with healthcare leaders, it's always like, but this is my role. This is what I do. This is who I am. No, is that who you are in terms of your identity, or who you are beyond this? Because you're not good. You're not good.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest here. And so it's not about poking fault. It's about figuring out, how does decision quality and pressure affect the rest of your time or your work? Because one thing that was startling to me is, in my interview series, one of the doctors mentioned that in the US, there's about reported up to $935 billion in healthcare waste. Stacey, what do you think that is? Do you think that's just equipment? No, that's humans making ill-formed decisions. That's humans not being regulated. That's humans actually not figuring out what the end goal is. What is leadership? I tell people all the time, it's not always in a corporate setting. It's about how people mirror you, how people see you, how people want to honor you, how people want to create with you. Psychological safety is what? It's this idea of vulnerability and trust within teams. It's about cultivating that. And so if you don't do that with yourself first, if you don't look within the man in the mirror, as Michael Jackson used to say, then how are you leading properly? How is someone going to reflect what you give off? It's not possible.
Yeah. 100%. Self-awareness is key. And I think, like you said before, we are avoiding looking inward, and we are avoiding self-awareness, and we are avoiding being in the moment and accepting, because we all just want to have control and we want the answers. You said it before, you talked about when you were first diagnosed and got through to the other side, and everybody was like, oh, so now you're going to eat right, and you're going to exercise, and you're going to blah, 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 all the things. Where that's coming from is people wanting there to be a formula. If you do all the right things, you won't get cancer, because hearing your story triggers them.
Correct.
They're listening
Absolutely.
to what you went through, and they're not okay.
Yep.
Because they're not comfortable accepting uncertainty. They don't want to hear that this could happen to them, or this can happen to somebody that they know. They want to know, I'm going to be okay because I exercise and eat right. And my kids are going to be okay because they exercise and eat right. And of course, there's some merit to that, right? We know that being healthy can control certain things, right? But it's about what we do with the hard days, what we do with the feelings that are uncomfortable. Can we understand what's coming up for us and make sure that we're not making bad decisions because of that? So to kind of just bring that into my field, right? Therapy and being a therapist can be so nuanced. But where I see this showing up in my field is, a therapist could be sitting in the room with a client or a patient, whatever we want to call them, and they might be bringing something up that triggers what we call in my field countertransference, right? We're triggered because it's now bringing up something from our past, or something that we haven't resolved, or it could even be something in our present that is something we're avoiding because we don't want to have those hard feelings. And so now we are struggling as therapists in the room to sit with our patient's pain and to tolerate the discomfort of what's showing up in the room. And we want to give them a quick fix. Maybe if I use this modality, or maybe if I use that modality, or if I give them a little CBT and I give them a worksheet and I reframe their thoughts, now they're going to feel better, and we won't have to deal with the pain that needs to be sat through and processed in order to move forward. And I think that we see this, and this is the work you're doing, right? Not just in the therapy fields, but across all of healthcare, right? How is the triggered healthcare worker, right, maybe not making good decisions because they're getting triggered and don't even know what is triggering them, and wanting to just find the quick fix. And I think that's where you're looking at, all these costs in healthcare that are wasted, right, by a bunch of triggered healthcare workers that are not okay,
Yeah.
running around, running amok.
And triggering each other. But it's interesting because I know my story is dramatic. But you can take this story and you can apply it to different aspects of one's life. Losing a job, getting fired, getting a divorce, having their own medical situation, maybe not as dramatic as cancer. And Stacy, I know that for most people, this is very triggering as well. Like when they hear that I survived cancer once, okay. Then they hear I survived cancer again. That's very triggering because they're thinking about their mortality. They're thinking about how come a loved one of theirs didn't survive and you get to survive now twice? Stacy, I lost 11 people that I know with cancer. Some of them, it was their first battle with it. So a part of me is thinking to myself, yeah, I could live in that whole idea of survivor's guilt, but different paths walk different ways. And so if I could be a resource to individuals in this, especially trickle down with healthcare leaders who are taking care of other people, then for me, it's not a burden. It's a responsibility, a personal one that I take very, very seriously. And so, yeah, triggered people are triggering each other. I had an aunt who passed away about 8 years ago. She was deaf and mute. And I said in her eulogy, because she didn't have a voice to speak, I said, I know you can hear me now, because whatever you believe happens afterwards. I do believe that there's something, I don't know what, I can't name it officially. None of us can. But I said that hurt people, because she would do things to lash out. And now as an adult, I see that. So I wanted to honor the complete story of her, because people love to gloss over and love to say things at one's eulogy. But the truth remains is that we're complex individuals. We are a paradox in and of ourselves. And so I wanted to give voice to the fact that as much as she literally, I'm telling you truthfully, when I grew up, now in retrospect, she was my greatest teacher. She taught me so much about living with pain. She taught me so much about not expressing. She would see family members getting married and she would ask if she could get married, but who's she going to marry? She would ask me, can I drive? And I would say to her, I don't think that's like I would in like simple sign language, I would be like, that's not possible. Mm-hmm. She would listen to things on her Walkman and I would be like, can you hear that? And she would go like this. And what I said in her eulogy was that she would feel the vibration. That was her context. And so I'm sharing this because I think when it comes to people triggering one another and whatnot, you have to find something that's relational with this. So when I deal with healthcare workers, like they're like, well, no one understands. I'm like, well, how in your life have you resourced the same feeling? Forget about the same situation. How have you resourced the same feeling in the past that has made you, that you overcame or you were successful in? I'm like, go with that feeling and see what that actually brings to you. And so most of my work is also embodied. I do somatic work. It's not just about talking through things. It's about how does that land for you? Do you see or sense sound, images? Is there something that's actually bubbling to the surface that wants to be expressed? And I think it's very important for us to do this work because gosh, man, we live in such a disruptive, complicated, I don't care what country you're in, like things are crazy and manic at the moment. And if we cannot find the semblance of stillness and silence, and people are like, that sounds so simple. I'm like, okay, practice it for me. I want you to do intentional silence, 2 minutes a day. Tell me how that feels for you. And they're like, oh man, it's hard. I'm like, yeah, it's hard.
It's very, very difficult for people, especially in today's world with technology, right? With all the short form videos we watch and all of the constant stimulation, we can't even sit at a traffic light anymore without picking up our phones because it's too boring to just sit there for a minute and a half and look out the window, right? We're overly stimulated and we are just packed with so much information all the time. There's so much, I think there's too much to that helps us avoid instead of sitting with. And you talk about somatic work, for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what that means, right? We feel things in our body, and sometimes our body remembers something before our mind does. And we will often feel our experiences or feel our triggers through a sensation. It could be, a tight chest, or it could be a pain in our head, or it could be a fluttering in our stomach, suddenly feeling nauseous or getting a stomach ache, or, a tingling sensation that travels up and down your body, or you start to sweat. There's so many different ways it shows up. And often people don't know what is causing it. And then they try to jump into their cognitive brain and they want to find the reason because they want control, right? What's the thought? Let me find the thought that's connected to this feeling. And there isn't always a thought, right? Sometimes we got to just stay with that feeling and be curious about the feeling and know that our body is reminding us about something. that it's been through. And sometimes we need to just pause and honor that and sit with it without
Absolutely.
distracting on your phone.
Especially now everyone has access to information, right? So they're like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm in fight and flight, and now I'm in freeze, and now I need Vegas, Vegas nerve stimulation. Okay, I'm like, great, like do whatever you want. I mean, I'm a coach. I'm not prescriptive in any sense, but what works for you works for you. For me, it's meditation. I've been doing it for over 20 years. It started at 1 minute, now I'm at 20 minutes. But whatever works for you. Journaling, does that work? Sitting quiet, walking in silence, breathing exercises, humming, I don't care. It's not a one size fits all type of a situation. It's what actually can you implement, and what can you show not only consistency to, but diligence and devotion. A lot of this work, when it especially comes to healing, it's really being devoted to something that's greater than the problem. It's being devoted to the fact that you don't know the answer, but you're willing to sit with that uncomfortable feeling. It's allowing that to be pervasive in a certain way, in a positive way, hopefully, and then sharing that type of resource with one another, because everyone wants to feel good. Everyone wants to feel great. And you know this with research, when it comes to change, the models of change state that it's not that people don't want to change. They don't know how to change. They don't know if they're thinking about change, wanting to relapse, and so really the key element there is to really figure out exactly what works and what doesn't. And then another thing is, when you mentioned about the somatic, and thank you for that great explanation for your audience, it was really fantastic, is that in some of the healing modalities that I studied, especially one called Huna healing, the kahunas of Hawaii believe that not only does the body send you sensations, but it has language, has consciousness. And so we have to sit in silence and stillness to actually talk to those body parts. I call it the three brains: head, heart, and gut. But whatever is sort of coming at you.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true, right? It's talking to you, it's sending you a message, right? What is the stomach ache telling me? What is the headache telling me? Be curious about it, right? Don't say, oh no, how do I make it go away? So, that's interesting, right? I wonder what's happening for me. What's been triggered? What's coming up for me? What has my body remembered that my mind has not remembered? And let me try to understand what I'm feeling and what I need right now. And this is all work we can do if we allow the pause to sit in the stress temporarily, right? So that we can process and heal. And I think that, when you're dealing with healthcare workers, such as what you're doing, the work you're doing, you're probably dealing with people who are triggered constantly because they're always faced with somebody else's pain and somebody else's difficulty and somebody else's sad story, right? That probably is triggering all day long. And so there's so much coming up for the people that you're working with. So, it's really, again, such important work that you do. So I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I'm wondering if, since you talk so much about really, wanting to live and how to live your life, and we talk about, kind of silver linings and how to really be resilient in the face of something so hard. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you want to share with my listeners about what it really means to be resilient in a situation like this and what it means to live.
Yeah, so on stages and in my work, I speak a lot about a framework of mine called the Adaptive Resilience Framework. And it's really about leaders, especially healthcare leaders, figuring out the signals and the patterns as to what's exactly happening. And one way to sort of deal with that or figure that out is something that I spoke about on the TEDx stage. I did a TEDx talk about a year and a half before my relapse in June of 2024. And it was a lens that I use called the ALOHA reboot. And we all know ALOHA in Hawaiian means hello. So it's a hello to your inner self. And it's just an acronym. So A stands for acknowledge. Like in my case, acknowledge where I'm at. I'm in the hospital. This happened. I'm in a quarantine room. People are coming in and out of the room. Just face what's happening. L stands for listening. So listen to your inner self. And I mentioned a little bit about Huna healing. And in Huna healing, they believe you can actually talk to the body that has language. O stands for opening. So open yourself up to this, whether you believe in what you believe or whatever the case may be. Just be open to exactly what life is showing you. H stands for harnessing. So harness this, see what fits, what doesn't work, see what patterns and things that you can actually make sense. And A stands for acting. But as we all know, you need to have courage to act. So there's a caveat to that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just called ALOHA, 7 minutes a day. Someone once said to me, they don't have 7 minutes. So I said, just take one of the acronyms and just practice it for a minute a day. And it's called the ALOHA Reboot. And just wanted to remind people once again, performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. And I say this again, because people always want to perform. We always want to do and be. And sometimes the being and the doing distracts us from what life is actually showing us. Because I've learned the hard way that you don't always have to optimize. You don't, like, recovery doesn't happen. You don't have to track every metric. I know the wearables all want us to do this, and it's great for a certain point, but healing happens highs and lows, up and down, pockets, things that you don't discover. And so I just want to leave people with having the gratitude and also the devotion and the humility to actually figure out you don't have the answers. So let's let light reveal itself through itself.
Yeah, I love that. And we don't have to have the answers, and that's okay. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Is there anything, any last thoughts, anything that you really wanted to say today that we didn't get to before we close out for today?
I would say central theme is really echoes a movie, The Shawshank Redemption, that I love, which is just get busy living. Like, yes, things are terrible in our lives. It's just part of this whole thing we call life, that giant rock that's floating out in space. This is just part of it. So just find a way to live. Just find those pockets.
Yeah, it's about knowing that there's good days and bad, right? Life ebbs and flows. Pain sometimes happens, and it's about what we do with it that makes all the difference.
Absolutely.
So for my listeners, if they want to hear more about you and the work that you do, where can they find you?
Very easy. My website, saviopclemente.com, SAVIOPCLEMENTE.com. I have my keynote work there. I still have some spots for 2026, my coaching information, also my book. And then also every Wednesday, I write a Substack newsletter called The Human Resolve. And in it, the last few months, I've been exploring with CEOs and CMOs on the healthcare leadership operating system. And I talk about head, heart, and gut intelligence and what I call the 3 brains. And if people want to find me on social media, I'm at every platform at The Human Resolve. Because Stacy, what else do we have left except for resolve and resolution in our lives? Even though it's not easy, we have to find a way to create the circumstances for that to manifest.
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. It's been great having you. And for my listeners, I hope this helps. If it does, please share it. And I will see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
You've been listening to What Triggers You with Stacy Pellettieri. For more information or to apply to be on the show, visit whattriggersyou.com. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to listen, like, and subscribe. Until next time.